So there's a part of the journey that starts out in the discussion. What are you thinking, or where are you feeling called? And then you start building a short list. So your junior year or even sophomore year, you could start, if you want to be a little bit ahead, and look at and say, what's your top 15 schools? Now, you're not going to keep 15 schools, but you look at your top 15, and then you tier them down, and then you start looking at, okay, where does that degree going to take me? Then you get into discussion, obviously, around cost, and you look at that side of things. Then you get into going and actually, when you get a shorter list, of visiting those campuses.
There's a price and there's a cost.
Yes.
Right. And so free even costs, because you're making a decision and you're receiving instruction.
Everything free is not free. What you also have to ask at other institutions that may be promoting themselves as free is, yes, tuition may be free, but now they're having to recover their finances in other interesting ways, which is through fees, through IT support. And so you need to ask as a parent, even at those places, can I see the total bill?
Welcome to another episode of the Made to Be Great podcast, where we have conversations that spark growth. If you are a high school student or the parent of a high school student, you are going to want to tune in close to today's episode. I am joined here with Mr. Eric Currie. Thank you very much for joining the show today. Tell the world a little bit about yourself and what you do in the world, and
Definitely.
We'll start unpacking some college and some financial aid stuff, and maybe go on some rabbit trails from there.
Sure.
So we'll see.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me on, Josh. Love to be here. I believe it's called Made to Be Great podcast. Sir. So it's great to be on here with you. I've been in Christian higher education for over 25 years. It's hard to believe when I say that. It just seems like yesterday that I was in Christian higher education. I was with Asbury Theological Seminary for 18 years of the 25 as various roles. Started out as a missions counselor, and then all the way up through to my final role was Associate Vice President for Enrollment Management. Served and helping lead some of the sites that we had around the United States, and it was a lot of fun working in the graduate education area. And then also as Vice President for Enrollment Management for 4 years at Houghton University. I know we're going to have a lot of discussions around financial aid and the student's journey in that process. Definitely got heavily involved on that side, in especially in the undergraduate world, looking at ways and creating pathways and opportunities for students to be able to handle the financial costs that can come around an undergraduate opportunity. And now the last 5 years, I've been a part of the team at Campus EDU. It's a Christian education tech company working in the area of building courses, also in the area of dual enrollment and in that arena. And then also working on building out courses for high school students, and then also for churches, discipleship and those types of areas. So it's been a lot of fun being involved in that. We have 4 areas. I'll stop after that because I know this is about financial aid on that side. But with Campus EDU, we have 4 values that we hold to, which is anchored. We're anchored in Christ. All of our courses are built to glorify God. Accessible, affordable, which is going to be one of our key points. That's going to be the key point. And then appealing, which you definitely have with your podcast. I love your setup here. You're building a good appeal. And if people went to our courses and saw them, they would see that they also have that view from us. But that's my world right now. Cool. I'm also been married 30 plus years, and I have three mark on that. And have 3 wonderful children. I won't tell their ages. They'll be embarrassed because they might see this podcast. So I won't do that to them. So blessed to have them, but they are teenagers and young adults. So that's me.
Which I am fortunate to know them, and I think they're pretty awesome too.
Thank you. Appreciate
I won't embarrass them any more than that.
We'll move on. They're nervous already.
Yeah, right. So what got you into the field of higher education? Like when you went to Asbury for the first time as an enrollment counselor, what prompted you to seek that out?
Sure. It was interesting when I'm originally from Eastern Canada. And so when my wife, Charlene, and I moved to Florida and to be a part of Asbury Theological Seminary, they were looking for a person to kind of work in an admissions role. And it was an opportunity where I had some of the people that were there on the team who talked to me and said, Eric, we think you could maybe do this or at least try it out. And it came about because I knew a lot of people. My background previously had been with a lot of pastors and so on within the denomination that I was a part of. And so it seemed like natural connections, and they wanted me to go to some events. And so I actually went to my first event in the panhandle of Texas to visit a university and to represent for Asbury Seminary. And I came back and I was fired up, and they were like, man, Eric, you seem to have some value and seem to be interested in this. And it just kind of grew from there. It wasn't something that I went into, Josh. My journey to education is interesting. I'm a first generation student. So that's why I'm also
college,
first generation to college. In my family, there was 5 of us. I was the youngest. I grew up on a dairy farm. My dad was extremely intelligent, but had a grade 8 education. He was a depression kid. School was obviously, it was work to save your family, right? For economics. My mom had a grade 12 education, but that was it. And so their model of life was to work hard, and that's how you got ahead. And college was there, but it wasn't necessarily maybe something that was seen for us as a family. It wasn't against education. It was just, that's for others, not for people who come from our side of the kind of tracks, if you want to say it that way. And I went off to college, and I really was like, wow, this is something that really is changing my life. I went to a great small college, and they really invested in me, and I saw the growth that happened into my life because of that experience that I had at that college. And then I was in the local church, went from there, and that was kind of where I was going. I was going to be a pastor, and that was the passion in place. And then,
so was that a Christian university?
It was a Christian university that I went to.
It was a small private Christian university
in Eastern Canada.
And that at that time, your career path was going to be as a pastor.
Yes.
Okay. So that was kind of the setup for that.
Yes.
And then that had a very positive impact on your life.
Yes. Yeah. And my calling with God in my life was that I said yes to him and said, wherever you want to take me, whatever that is, my yes is to you. And it first started in the church, and then I went to Asbury, and just everything just seemed to align, and the doors opened, and they just kept giving me different positions and different roles. And God just continued to bless. I was able to be there. That first stint I had with them, close to 10 and a half years. And then God opened the doors for our family to go to Houghton, for me to be the vice president of enrollment management, which was an amazing experience, and to be able to be a part of that. And then Asbury called and said, hey, would you come back? And I was able to come back in 2016 to be a part of that. And now joining Campus EDU was really an outflow of around our mission, where we really wanted to offer, number one, Christian education, but also to make it accessible anywheres in the world, and to make it affordable, but also to have it in an appealing format. Sometimes, specifically in the online arena, sometimes the online courses, they can be pretty stale, pretty tough. Yeah. So
that's track with, especially for young people. I mean, I would still probably feel that way, that to be like, keep my attention, please.
Yes. Yes.
In fact, that made me think, for my mortgage license, the continuing education that I take, I deliberately take one that it's called Knowledge Coop. There's a free plug for you. You're welcome.
I love it.
It's funny. Like they kind of do they make like a stand-up routine kind of vibe for the material.
Yes.
And every other course is like, today we're going to talk about Regulation Z, and it's just like zonk fest.
Yes.
Like, so anyway, that made me think of that, of like, how you deliver that can make a big difference, especially online.
Definitely.
With stuff.
Definitely. And for this generation too, specifically, when you think about our teenagers, TikTok, Instagram, and I'm dating myself now, all the other apps and platforms that they're on, Netflix, Disney Plus, watching those, they're at a certain level. And when then they go and do, say,
of
an
like
online
excitement and kind of energy.
Yeah.
Right?
And so much of learning happens to this generation that's coming up is through story and through what we call the narrative. That to not utilize that, you're missing a learning opportunity, and this generation's looking for that. And so where we're going, and this is not about our company, but where we're going in education, where I am at currently, is that we're really pushing in to make sure that's being utilized, because we believe that's a huge value in the educational learning space. And so, and that's something I think that other universities now are engaging. You see that. I'm not going to plug any of them, but they're out there in the Christian market, and they're also out there in the public and private universities now, and they're online. They're starting to lean into telling the story as a part of the educational journey, not just giving you the content, but they're also bringing in the other side and aspect.
Okay. So someone who is in high school now, or has a high school student, and they're in the process, it's that time of year where they're in the process of considering, where am I going to go if I'm the high school student? If you're the parent, where does my child want to go? Where would I like them to go? What are some of the biggest, both of our worldview is Christians.
Yes.
And so we've both chosen to have our kids. And I don't know about your kids, but my kids all love and appreciate it. We've chosen to have them in a private Christian environment for the last 5 years, I think, in high school. And so, but what are some of the contrasts of, at a high level, kind of from a neutral as we can standpoint? What are some of the contrasts, like pros and cons, benefits, to like a state school type of thing? Like, we're here in Florida recording this, so a lot of the students want to go to UCF or FSU or UF, and and those are all great institutions. I actually graduated from UCF myself.
Yes,
so,
go Knights.
But so what are some of the, versus like some of the other private Christian schools that we have here in Florida? What are some of the pros and cons? Obviously, like financial for in-state, if you have bright futures, that's a big benefit.
Definitely.
But how would you see that from your point of view, with your background? What should parents be thinking about? What should students be thinking about from a selection standpoint?
Sure. Definitely, you want to think outcomes. One, that's not the overall, but when you start, you want to look at what's my student, the degree that they're choosing potentially, and where they're feeling called. Like we said, we're both coming from a Christian perspective, so we use the word calling. So, and it's hard for a student who's 16, 17 saying, okay, I know that I'm going to be a teacher, or I'm going to be an engineer, or I'm going to be a scientist, or I'm going to be a medical doctor. Things can change when you're 20. Life can look really different. Like,
most people have multiple careers.
Correct. Like, that's right. Like for me, I started out going towards being a youth pastor, and back in the day of the titles of youth and young adults. Now it's next gen. But I'm ended up now in Christian higher education. My degree is not in higher education. My bachelor's is a bachelor's of religion youth ministry major. And then I have a master's of divinity. So none of it is in higher education, but I was trained and developed and discipled and mentored through that process. So there's a part of the journey that starts out in the discussion. What are you thinking, or where are you feeling called? And then you start building a short list. So, with my children, my students, I've sat down and said, okay, start out, early on, say in your junior year or even sophomore year. You could start, if you want to be a little bit ahead, and look at and say, what's your top 15 schools? Now, you're not going to keep 15 schools, but you look at your top 15, and then you tier them down. And maybe a student can come up with 15 schools, maybe they don't. And then you start looking at, okay, where does that degree going to take me? Then you get into discussion, obviously, around cost, and you look at that side of things. Then you get into going and actually, when you get a shorter list, of visiting those campuses. Here's what I say when you were going on the pros and cons. A lot of times people automatically cross off Christian universities, even in the state of Florida, even with the available funding that they could be receiving. They cross them off because they feel like they're already too expensive. And I would say, don't do that. Give the Christian university the opportunity to work with your student. Keep them on their list, especially if they're able to make what I call discipleship maker students. When you go and you connect, ask to connect with their alumni, ask to connect with people who've gone out with their degrees and where they are. Those universities are more than happy. I'm not going to name them, but there's 3 that I'm thinking specifically in the state. If they want to ask you later, I'll give you the names of those universities that are here in the state. But I would encourage people to go and hear their stories and give them an opportunity to speak to that. Because I think the difference, and I don't want to speak bad about publics or privates who are not Christian, but the difference should be that as a parent that you would expect, especially as a Christian, is that when they go in that classroom, if they're training to be a doctor, if they're training to be a teacher, if whatever the degree of training to be a business person, that when they go in that classroom, it's also they're being shaped in the Christian worldview. And they're also not only getting the tools and the understandings that they need to be able to compete in this very complicated world that we were discussing off camera, off before, and we won't get into that we're currently living in, that they would hope that that would happen in that classroom. And so even if you have to pay a little bit more for it, if that university is really helping shape and root that student for the future that's coming with a Christian worldview, I think that's a really important, really important positive that you put in there that can take the con and change around. I'm not speaking badly. I have a lot of friends where their students will go and who are friends of ours who will go to state universities.
Yeah.
And that's a choice the family has to ultimately sit down and make. But I also want to encourage families on this time over here is don't just cross off a Christian university because you think they're too expensive, or you go on their website and you do their price calculator. And then what happens is you see, all right, you did the price calculator and you see what it says, and it says it's $35,000 even before room and board. Yeah. What I would say is, okay, fair, but also don't be afraid to go through the journey and have the discussion with them. And even look at out-of-state Christian college universities. They're eager to get Florida students. I have a lot of friends in Ohio. I have a lot of friends in New York. I have a lot of friends back at Houghton. I know the president really well there. Not a plug for them, but I did work there, and I believe in that school. They would be glad to work with students from Florida. And I know that's true across the board of the Christian college universities. And so I would encourage the families to give them an opportunity. But I also think it's fair for the family to look at outcomes and look at where they're going. And then you get into, as I said, you're visiting campus, you get into, is it a fit? How does the student feel when they're on campus? Can they envision themselves there at that university? And is it offering the types of things that's going to allow them to grow into the person that they believe Jesus wants them to be? So that's kind of in the process. Hope that's helpful.
Very helpful. So a couple of things you said there, just to recap, that caught me is that, and also like putting this with my world and mortgages and
definitely.
There's a price and there's a cost.
Yes.
Right. And so free even costs, because you're making a decision and you're receiving instruction. And anymore, I mean, this is a whole other episode, but I graduated high school in 1998 and I graduated college from UCF in 2013. So you could do the math on that and figure out that I wasn't a straight path. But from what I remember from when I first enrolled at USF in Tampa, right after high school, to when I was at UCF, 2010 through 13, I think, compared to now, it's different. There's worldview being instructed in every subject.
Yes.
And so not that that's good, bad, right, or wrong, but it is. And
right.
So I think it's something that I'm aware of. And again, this isn't like a negative or a judgment on any, because like you, I have many friends that their kids are going to UCF, which I, go Knights, like I'm an alumni.
Right.
But in thinking about what's the value, what's the cost versus the price, that's a calculation I spend a lot of time thinking about as a parent.
Yes.
What's the environment? Being almost 30 years now into a mortgage career, seeing lots of tax returns and talking to lots of people and hearing different stories. And also I love statistics. and seeing that, most people have multiple careers, not employers, actual whole careers.
Yes.
And so it's wild to me. We were just in our school guidance office several weeks ago, and the guidance counselor was asking my 15-year-old, what do you want to be when you grow up, basically? And I'm like, dang, like she's 15. Like, how do you expect her? Like,
Right.
most adults can't answer this question like with accuracy.
No.
But there are moves she's making that's going to maybe influence the opportunity and the trajectory. So it's a fair question, but also at the same time feels like kind of I feel like we should weight that much lighter to them.
Yes.
Like right now, what do you think you might want to do? Also respect, like in 5 years, you might have a completely different.
Yes.
And so to me, some of the things I think are the most important is, what's the environment going to be? What's the training to their spirit and their character going to be?
Yes.
What kind of opportunities are going to be put in front of them socially? As an adult, I am very intentional about like the social situations I put myself in. And so it's wild to think like, I'm just going to let my child just go into like any kind of social situation, which might not be beneficial to their life.
Correct.
And I'm being vague there, but I'm talking about like, the party vibe, drinking, drug, all that stuff that is prevalent on a lot of, not that Christian colleges don't have this, but I'm just saying that it's different. It's definitely my opinion is something to consider. And so we were having dinner, I don't know, several months ago, and we got to talking about this, and you like opened my mind to something that never occurred to me. So you know, when you were saying don't automatically exclude the cost, I had kind of already accepted that I'm going to get tagged into Kingdom Come for this college that my daughter wants to go to.
Yes.
Kind of like reluctantly, kind of already accepting that.
Right.
And you opened my mind to some things that was like, hey, actually, you might have a couple moves here. And you talked about, I don't want to put words in your mouth, so I'll try to give the 10,000 foot view and you can unpack it for the viewers. But it was kind of like different categories of schools. Like one has an overabundance of applicants and they can kind of select from anyone. And to me, where I thought of, there was like, in my world, basic supply and demand economics, right? When you have a big shortage of supply, like whoever's in control of that remaining supply, like they can kind of do what they want. Versus the other type of school is like one that's really seeking higher enrollment and doesn't have yet an overabundance of applicants, and they're sort of maybe like an excess of supply. And so the buyer in that case has a little bit more leverage in that situation. So do you tell the viewers about this? Because this is like probably on the mind of every parent, whether they're going to an out-of-state public or in-state or out-of-state private, or like what are some of the characteristics of those two types of schools, and are there other types?
Sure. What really started my thinking on this process, and I talked to you before we were on camera, and I'm gonna name him because people can look him up later and read his materials and go through it. There's a gentleman by the name of Jeff Salingo who writes a lot in the higher ed space. And he writes a lot. He's kind of been dominant in writing around the top 10% of schools. But in the last 3 years, he's really started to focus on what we would call the other 50%. And also sharing the value of those schools, and that families and students should consider them. He just wrote a book called Dream School, which I recommend for people to read and review. But he also, and people want to look it up, they can Google Jeff Salingo, and then within that, there's a plug for Google, but hey, they can go out and hit the algorithm.
Plugging people today.
We're plugging people. I hope you get the sponsor, Josh. I hope you get the sponsor there. So I know. Go for it. He's got Celsius going on over there, guys.
One day they're going to write a big fat check to the Made to Be Great.
That's right. We'll hashtag him, right? That's what, or we'll get some of my teens to do that. But he shared in that also what's called the buyers and sellers market. So you can also put that by his name, buyers and sellers. So you can go out and you can look at this on your own. So all my other higher ed friends who are still at higher ed universities and colleges, please don't hate me for this. This is public information. I also had a friend early on in my life when I was helping plan a church in Portland, Maine. He always said to me, Eric, information is king. And I've always carried that. Information is king. He was an investor, an entrepreneur, has done really, really well. And in higher ed, information is king. And so if you can go in with as much information, it's going to be really helpful in this process. And I feel like I shared the story when I started. I was a first generation student. So I kind of took at face value everything that was happening in front of me. And we can be very, very trusting. And I'm not saying I went to a Christian school. I'm not saying they did anything underhanded. Thankfully, they didn't. And I'm not saying any Christian university or college or public or private is going to do anything underhanded. But there's things in the process maybe we just take for granted that, oh, that's just a given.
Yeah.
And what
just like I was thinking. And
yes.
It's, to your point, it's not bad. This is just the reality of life.
Yes.
Is that no one's going to, like, if you're selling your house.
Yes.
Okay. And you get a buyer with an offer, if you're thinking you'll really take 20,000 less, you're not going to start by telling them that. Nobody would do that. So this is not like a knock on anyone or anything.
Correct.
But to your point, that information is valuable.
Correct. And so I would encourage families, I encourage students to go ahead and look for that, called the buyers and sellers list. You can put in your schools that you're looking at and see where they are on that list.
So this is something that's available online,
public,
like a website.
It's public information. Yes.
Okay.
There's a buyers and sellers list.
And that is published where?
I would go to Jeff Solingo and he has it on his information on his websites.
You can get to it there. Okay.
Yes. And so it's a great resource and you can see that. I would encourage, if you want the hot states where the schools are doing really, really well in the enrollment are also the same states that people are moving to. So it's going to be harder to leverage conversations around finances because those universities can get their class numbers and get their enrollment classes that they're wanting because of the movement of people coming to the state and
the demand is higher
and the law of numbers. So in the state of Florida, you're going to have less wiggle room. It doesn't mean that you don't ask schools to say, hey, can you help me? Especially if you're a family and you have more than just one child that potentially could end up coming to their university. So I know in your situation, your oldest is leading out. We're not going to name their schools they're looking at, but you have two more, I believe, that are coming up through that may go to college and universities.
Yeah.
And if your oldest has a great experience at said university, probably the other two will at least be giving that institution the opportunity of courting them to come there, right? Mm-hmm. So you have some levers to say, hey, I may end up being, we'll say this as a parent, you'll be writing the checks for maybe two more to come to the same institution. That's a conversation piece that you can have right now. Now, even if this is your last child coming up through, don't be afraid to say, look, financially, we may look one way on paper, but in reality, this is where we're at. And don't be afraid to come in and have kind of a place where to have a discussion with the school. What's the worst thing they can say? They can say no. The hard part, and we know this, we discussed it that night, is that your child, your teen can be so into that school that to have that discussion that you may have to walk away because the price just can't be done, even with all the positives, the things that we've already discussed. You have to be prepared. If you can't make it work, we also discussed, can we walk out and have $100,000 worth of debt? No, you can't do that. As I shared with you earlier, it just doesn't
map to like reality anymore of what that degree versus, and this is how I think now with my world is and what I mean by that is over the course of before and after college, I've paid probably more than my college tuition in other courses and different like coaching and learning experiences that probably have been more helpful and valuable to like my income earning potential, my personal network even. So that's how my mind is thinking about this. Like if I'm going to write a check for $100,000, what's the most financially beneficial way for me to do that?
Exactly.
And it doesn't feel like an undergrad degree is that. anymore.
It can be, as we shared before, and I keep saying off camera, I shared the stats where Gallup has come out recently with in 2019, 50+% families had a value in college education. It's now dropped to 35%. I think there's a lot.
That's a short period of time.
It's a short.
So it's changing quickly.
It's changing quickly. I think there's more than just about price point around that. I think there's other factors. We don't need to get into that. And so, but those questions impact families. And as I said, I believe in education. I believe in the value that a 4-year degree can provide you. But also, you have to go in and, as a family, saying, okay, this is a price point that's acceptable. Yeah. And I also say there's other entities that will push free is free. Everything free is not free. What you also have to ask at other institutions that may be promoting themselves as free is, yes, tuition may be free, but now they're having to recover their finances in other interesting ways, which is through fees, through IT support. And so you need to ask as a parent, even at those places, can I see the total bill? And if they're going to live in residence, you need to ask, what is that? Because sometimes schools are trying to recover what they miss on tuition on the residence side. And so on what you pay to live on campus, room and board, meals, all those types of things, whatever that might be, you need to get that all out and placed down. And so that's a really important part of the discussion that people need to look at. But back to the information is king, I would really encourage people to go and look at that and not be afraid. Where I was going with the state of Florida, I want you, if you can stay in the state of Florida and you love it, do it. But don't be afraid to look at some of the out-of-state schools, privates, and specifically in the Christian world and even the Bible colleges, if you're thinking ministry and doing that, and give them an opportunity to talk to you. In the Midwest, there's real opportunities for you to go there. Also in the Northeast, if you want to go, maybe say, I don't want winters. Okay, I understand that. But I will say this, you may be able to get a really amazing education and opportunity because of what they're willing to potentially do. And I can't promise, you're going to get the best prices, but there is opportunities there for you. And we talked earlier about the advantages potentially of a smaller school. Sometimes it's really good to be in a smaller school because you get opportunities you wouldn't have at a bigger place. When you're kind of maybe a big fish in a small pond, you get more opportunities. But if you're a big fish in a big pond, you don't get the kind of opportunities. I had a person who really shaped me when I was at Houghton University, who talked to me about the advantages of being a big fish in a small pond. And that really impacted me. And so if you have a student that's really strong in academics, and yes, I get it, that the research universities can look really good, but if you look at a smaller Christian private that has really good access to research universities later on, I have a really good friend whose son went to a really good Christian university for their 4-year underdegree grad. And now they've gone to graduate school and they're now teaching at an Ivy in the research area. And they started out at a Christian university and have been shaped by that. And they're getting their PhD. And I'm super proud of them. I won't embarrass them by giving their names, but they got amazing education and they had amazing SAT scores. They could have probably went free to the research universities, but they chose that private Christian university because of the opportunities, and they were able to work the financial numbers where it made sense. And now they're going through and they're going to get their PhD. And as I said, they're a teaching assistant at an Ivy right now. And it's just amazing to see them in that journey. So I just really encourage parents to get the information and start early and look at pathways. I know I'm talking quick. I'm originally from Canada, so I talk fast, but I also want to share with ways that parents can help the cost. Look through and look at dual enrollment classes. And also, if
this would be something they can look at probably as early as sophomore year.
Yes, sophomore year of high school, starting to take a couple of them and see if they could work off a semester or two where they're working towards their degree and working on their gen eds. That's not asking them to know their degree. I agree with you. At 15, it's pretty tough.
It's tough. I mean, maybe some people have an idea, but
it's a tough deal. Definitely. So if you could work off those general education requirements, that can really make it cheaper. As I share with you, the average right now, debt that students are coming out with from college, regardless of a private or public, which is reported by NerdWallet, was $43,000, which that's like, wow, $43,000, regardless if you're private or public. That was a shocking number to me. I would have thought it was lower, but they also put in a little caveat, which was interesting. They said now most students are not graduating in 4 years, they're graduating in 5 years. And it's that extension that's causing that loan increase.
And I think something I've seen on the mortgage side is people take loans to supplement lifestyle things like cars and going out to eat.
Yes.
And so a lot of that loan money might not even be direct higher education, but they're able to borrow that money with like almost no questions asked. And so that's a whole other issue. But nonetheless, they have this debt that now they're stuck with like for life. There's no even, I don't remember when this changed. You could maybe research it and put it in the show notes if you don't know. But there was a change in law where you can't even put this in a Chapter 7 bankruptcy anymore.
Yes.
So it's like literally like these people, like this is, you're dealing with, for the most part, probably people 22 years old or younger.
Yes.
And there's science that says your brain doesn't fully develop until something after that, 25 or something. I think it's different for men and women.
That's correct.
And so like we're giving this permanent, if you for close to permanent as you can get, liability to people who, you know, they're at a disadvantage strategically and like power dynamic wise to what's happening, which feels like crazy to me.
It really does that it has that. And I don't know when that changed either. So you're going to carry that potentially. And so it's important that you look at it. And also if you're taking out loans, and you didn't ask this question yet, and I'm kind of jumping in, but when you look at the different loans that a student can process to be able to cover their tuition, when you look at the Parent Plus loan now, the interest occurs right while they're in school,
from day one,
from day one.
Money out.
Yeah, and how many parents know that? Like that's a concerning. Like some parents know it, but do they ask that question? Are they sitting here thinking, "Oh, they're deferred because my loans were deferred until I graduated"? No, Parent Plus they start right on the get go. That's a big deal.
It's not nothing.
It's not nothing. So it's important that you walk through all of the points. And sometimes people look at their financial aid letter that they receive from schools and they see tuition, but they don't see the room and board. They don't see what that costs. They just see the tuition price. You need to make sure that's included. It's an all in. That's correct.
And probably different schools have much different ways of disclosing that at different stages. So just people can't assume that just because one school showed everything that the next school they're looking at
That's correct.
Showed everything. So you need to ask.
You need to make sure it's all cleared out, and you keep asking, what is my final, the final cost that I'll have to pay a year? And if you're receiving scholarships, you need to ask, is that the same amount that's awarded every year? I'm aware of schools that will give scholarships for 1 year, but then it adjusts in year 2, year 3, year 4.
You're like in the system, and your student loves it there. And what are you going to do?
Correct. So you need to ask this, and you need to know, is it GPA requirements to keep those scholarships? And is there a forgiveness semester? Because sometimes the first semester, I remember my first semester, I was very good at ping pong. My first, we joked that I had enough hours in ping pong my first 2 years of my college that I got a degree in ping pong. Now, it tells the kind of school that I went to, right? It was in ping pong. We won't say what other schools people could get their degrees in their first 2 years, but I'm sure folks listening can think of their first 2 years of school. It can be punishing because you're learning on your own. You're moving out, being an adult for the first time in a sense, without parents watching over you or your guardians. And so you need to know, okay, if you have a bad first semester, do you get recovery, or is oops? Well, the rest is on you. Those scholarships, and maybe they gave you $5,000 at the get-go. It's gone away for spring term. There's no forgiveness. And then what do you do? Right? You're like you said, you're already in the system. And that can be true of any institution. So you really need to make sure you have the information. You hear me keep saying that over and over. Information is king, but you've got to have it all outlined. and then fees, what could come in, student fees, all those different things. You need to know, are they all shown in this, or do they come later? And sometimes schools will say there'll be disclaimers. This is across the board. This isn't just a private issue or a public. They'll say what you get right now in your financial aid letter, the price point, it may change after a board meeting in May, because a lot of schools have their board meeting and they may look at, oh, we're not going to make our budget, and so we're going to have to put in an additional fee or something of that nature. You need to ask that question, because you don't want to get a revised financial aid letter in July and you're showing up in August and saying, okay, you're going to have to come up with another $1,000, $500 per semester or something of that nature. You need to know, is this a locked and loaded price, or is it adjustable? And those are things that, like I said, as a first gen student, variables. I had no idea. You need to seek clarity on that. And it's okay to do it. Sometimes people can feel like, oh, this is going to put us in a bad spot or not. No, like the directors of financial aid that I know, that I work with, specifically I work with in the private Christian world, they are glad to give you clarity. They want to give you clarity, and they want to answer your questions. They just don't want to overburden you with information too. So it's not anything that people are trying to hide. It's more that they're trying to hit the highlights. And so it's up to us as the parent and as the person who's signing on to say, okay, what about other details that I need to know? And the people that I work with, they've been amazing, and they're going to give you that clarity. And it's really on us to seek the clarity as parents.
It seems
like
a fair request. I mean, you're just asking for transparency, which I think is something that is a fair expectation.
Fair expectation.
So far, I've interacted a little bit with my oldest daughter's number one choice. And I can say that so far, even those early stages, they were very much like how you're describing, very receptive to questions. It wasn't like a combative or negative situation at all. They actually reiterated some of the information that we talked about at that first dinner. And so I can attest to that. A little bit of inside ball, as much as you feel comfortable saying with your world. A couple of the notes I wrote down from my call with that school was there was two things that would be like next steps for me to try to get a better situation. One was to do something that they called an appeal of the initial award. And then they also mentioned something related to the FAFSA that was called a professional judgment. That was, so the professional judgment, the way it was explained to me, and kind of our conversation got a little off the rails on that call. The guy was super cool. But, I was, so for someone who maybe doesn't, from an income perspective, qualify for a lot of need-based, that's where you can go in and kind of like say, hey, maybe you don't have the full picture because this, and this is going on. Because the FAFSA, just like, I mean, when we just did it, it was like, it connects to your IRS and like, that's it. Like, it's just, there's no, it was very just automated. So to the extent you feel comfortable, I think parents could benefit from whatever you have to say about either one of those two relative to this whole conversation.
As we joked off camera, I don't want to make enemies in the world that I don't want you to that I work either. With. But I also say, and this is what we discussed, is it's okay to push back and explain, like, you have two other children going to a Christian school right now, and it costs for you to do that. And you're not able to reflect that in the process. And so it's okay to say, we've made Christian education a value, but also we know as a family, we can't go over here because we also have other responsibilities. And these are the responsibilities that we have as a family, and to allow the university then to make their judgment at that point. And so is
this the professional judgment thing? Is that something that the university is individually making, or is this something that is done at a government level with the FAFSA, or who actually is making the judgment about
the university makes the judgment ultimately
based on what we say,
based on your information in the appeal letter. Yes, they're allowed to review and to again give institutional aid, institutional funding.
So this would be money from their bank per se, of money, not like an external government or other party. This is like the university deciding, hey, we hear what you're saying about your situation.
Yes.
We really want your student here. And so as a result of that, we'll give an additional X of aid.
That's correct. It's called a discount rate. And so, and this is where universities can get into trouble, and where they can give too much of their own financial resources.
In trouble,
and
meaning like put themselves in a bad financial situation.
Place. This is where you hear universities closing, universities getting in. A lot of them, their discount rate has got out of hand, unfortunately, and they have to monitor that. And that's where they get the judgment, the freedom. But the earlier you get into these discussions with the university, the better, because they may have funding that they're willing to be able to work with families, especially
and that as the time goes, what I'm hearing you say there is there's less and less because they're getting those decisions done early, and then their bank, quote unquote, of money that might be marked for that goes down.
Correct.
Interesting. So what's a good timeline when you say don't do it too late, do it earlier?
It's not a July discussion. It's not a July. It's not a July
March,
before
February, May.
Yeah.
I
would say, getting into these discussions in February, March, like some students will do what they call early acceptance. And so they could be accepted into a university in the fall of their senior year. If you have a price point and that university is willing to lock in at your price point, your financial budget number, and you want to have the discussion that early, you can tell a university, hey, this is where we're at. And you have to be reasonable. And you can say, Eric, what's reasonable? You get into discussion where you say a school's saying their hardline number is say they're at 43 and 43K and all in, and they come down in the 25 to the 20 range. You got to start really looking at what that means. But you got to go in with a number and discuss it with the university and give them opportunity, and they'll know whether or not they can, and whether or not they have money to be able to leverage in that situation. And
so when using those numbers, let's say it's 43 and it gets down to 25,
right?
And the family in their mind is thinking, I might be comfortable putting 5,000, and my student may be coming up with 5,000 through part-time work or maybe a small loan or combination. So would you, I'm asking this from a business mind and thinking negotiation, would you recommend that the family just straight comes in and says, hey, 10 grand is kind of like what we have available. Can we meet there? Like, would you suggest them putting the number in front of it, or does it depend on the school, or should you ask how low can you go? What's kind of a best practice for that discussion?
Yeah, it's one of those things where you come in with a number. If it's at 25 and at 10, I think that's too low. But I think you got to come back where you can meet halfway or in a middle place on them, and find out where they're at and how you see their student, and explain what is potential and what is possible. I think with families, I think with universities, that they have a place where there's a no-go line. They have the line. What it is figuring out, is your student in that place where it makes sense for them to say, okay, this is a student that we feel like, yes.
So that number could change based on how badly they want the student.
That's is that student an ideal student? Is it their fit? Do they do that? Do we see that?
Logical sense.
Yeah. Does student, and then they go through, and they also have numbers, like they have goals. Like if they need 400 students to make their budget numbers, and so their incoming class,
that they might be a little more aggressive.
They might be aggressive, and so they might go from that, and it moves around. And
I was just thinking in my mind, is somebody going to come up with an AI model to like give all that information to people in real time? Like, I don't know.
There probably is. Unfortunately, I'm on the higher ed side, and it's a crazy world. Like, you have people that are applying to so many schools, and it's like, why apply to so many schools when ultimately you're going to choose one? So that's why you got to be reasonable, and you got to be you got to also understand in schools, like I said, in the state of Florida, it's going to be harder on the leverage because a lot of people want to come to the state of Florida, and we have a lot of students where you might have more opportunities in other locations in other states. And like I said, you can check out the buyers and sellers list, and you can pop in schools, and they'll tell you where they're at. That's common information, so I'm not telling anything that's out of school. That's where people can go. So in that discussion, but so information, you keep hearing me say, information is king.
Would you recommend, because to my call that I had, the professional judgment and the appeal were mentioned, are these things you recommend people doing? Or is it kind of one or the other thing, or is it something that you would do like one and then the other, or run them simultaneously? What does that look like?
I would do the appeal and the professional judgment because that's the processes they have in place. And in all probability, they cannot answer properly without people going through that process, because they need to be also able to show the government agencies, the licensures and the accrediting bodies and the people who provide funding that they had a process in place. So they can't do it willy-nilly. It's actually a good protection.
Documentation of like what the procedure is, and that everyone had the same opportunity.
Correct.
And
which is really fair.
Favors to.
That's correct. Because schools get in trouble. You'll hear schools that get reported because they felt like people had an inside lane. And so this allows process. So you do it and you show faithfulness to the process. Even when you get that back, if there's no change, it's okay to say, okay, we still need to have a discussion, and you need to come in with what's a fair, opportunity. Things to look at is, can the students do student work on campus? Is there available, potential finances around that? Scholarships, all those types of things. What's being done around that? What other opportunities could be done? So I would look at that.
So is it right to start with the appeal? And then do the professional judgment?
I would do the appeal and then the professional judgment is what I would.
And those are both directed for most universities probably to the admissions counselor that the student's working with, or who would they?
Financial aid office is usually where that financial aid office is where that went from my time. The admissions office usually did not get involved in it because the admissions office had to be separated of powers, if you want to say that. They can discuss certain things around financial aid, but they usually always hand it off because technically that's a sales position. And so people,
the admissions.
Like state licensure gets a little bit, difficult around salespeople also having, finance conversations. So they want the financial aid people to have those discussions in an educational institution.
Makes a lot of sense. A lot of people who listen to this are right now, at least on my current, when this is being recorded, are real estate and mortgage. So we can relate a lot to like the sales lane versus the financial lane. Because in our world, sales lane is like the loan officer, and then there's underwriting that has to actually look at the nuts and bolts and decide. So it makes sense to have those roles separated, because otherwise things could get kind of out of hand. So that makes a lot of sense.
And usually what will happen, though, is financial aid will give the decision of the appeal and those processes back to the admissions counselor to discuss with the family. So you have that discussion with the family, but it's also okay to ask if you could speak to people in the financial aid office about the circumstances and possibilities. So there is a little bit, once the decision's made institutionally, sometimes the admissions person or the person that's been working with your student will then reach out and contact you and have a discussion. And it's okay to say, hey, we need to look at this. We need to pray about it. We also need to discern as a family, can we meet that number? I would say too, it's really important when you're looking at a school to make sure that institution that your student's looking at is engaging the parents or guardians. One of the things that's unbelievable to me is the amount of schools that do not engage the parents. And what's crazy to me is that the parent is the one, or the guardian is the one, that ends up signing off on some of these loans or some of these things, and you're not in the process till the end.
Or making the payment at the end of the day, even if it's not a loan you're signing for, it's a check you're writing.
Correct. It's really important you're brought in, and that speaks to the school's intent. And so when my oldest went through, one of the schools that really impressed me is early on, they invited me into the admissions conversation. Charlene and I almost immediately, they were talking to my oldest about, can we also connect with your parents in a video call with you just to discuss the journey and so on. And that welcome was so good. And what's amazing to me is they were the only university of the 10 that she looked at. They were the only ones that intentionally invited us into the process. And that was an amazing journey. And they were also at the end that they gave the best price point too. They were the one that were able through that journey and through my daughter's journey. And they were an out of state school. They were better than any of our in-state as well. Room, board, everything when it all came down. My oldest decided not to go because it was a little bit farther for her, and it just didn't work out at that time. But that's why I would say the offer. Yeah. And it was a great school, and it was a Christian university, and a really well-known Christian university. Very impressed by them and their process. So that speaks to the process too, that as parents pay attention to how your student's being treated and how you're being treated. If you're being valued, then in all likelihood that will continue on through the process. And if you're not being valued and then your student goes there and you have a difficulty, it's going to be a tough time. So that process is really, really important. It speaks to what you can expect all the way through the journey when they graduate.
Yeah, something that's been weird to me as a parent going through this now that I didn't quite see from the same vantage point as a student.
Yes.
Is that, my oldest is, she wants to be independent. She wants to do things on her own. And it has frustrated her a bit because she's kind of under the shadow of my tax return and trying to get like aid and do it on her own. It's a very weird dynamic. Like, she's a legal adult.
Yes.
She's currently like a student. She doesn't have vocational income.
Yes.
And so it's wild to me that, and this is, I guess, how it's always been since I can remember, but like that the family is automatically like expected to, like, they're counting my income, quote unquote, against her.
Yes.
When it's not really her income. Like, you know what I mean?
Yes.
It's like when you're 16, okay, cool. But like when you're 18, 19, 20, it's kind of a very interesting dynamic of expectations and policies and like norms that just are out there. And so that is some very powerful information that I think probably, I mean, my wife and I both have undergrad degrees. Yes. I've been around higher education a lot. I've never heard those things put out that you shared. Yeah. And knowledge is power.
Yes.
Implementation of knowledge is even more powerful.
Yes.
And so that was really helpful to me, and I appreciated the share. And I'm like, when you told me that, in my mind, I thought, man, I need to get him on the podcast because we have so many friends who probably I would have never thought to even explore. And I don't follow a lot of the things you follow, like articles you've shared with me and things we talked about on the pre-show. And so, because it's just not my lane. So that's been very helpful and fascinating, and certainly hope that this helps other people that are listening to this. This could be the most financially impactful episode people watch of the Made to Be Great podcast, because, doing the math, I mean, even if it's $5,000 better for 4 years, that's a lot of money.
It's a lot of money.
The website you mentioned one more time for that guy with the school.
Sure. It's Jeff Selingo. If they just search Jeff Selingo, and it's SELINGO. And then when you go in there, he has it on his own personal page, the buyers and sellers and that side of things. And if you want to put my email down on the podcast, you're welcome to do that. People can reach out to me. I'd be glad to connect with families and just talk about their questions and help them. Oh yeah. And
you beat me to that as I'm thinking about how we wrap this up. I'm like, how can people reach out to you? And that was a very generous offer to put out there.
I definitely want to do that. And I would say this, I am biased to Christian education. I believe in that. And I give a full plug to them and say to families, cast a wide net and don't be afraid. But if you choose, as we've said, private schools or private non-Christian or to publics and so on, good for you. They're good schools. And then the encouragement is that you find a vibrant church and community for your student to be a part of, so they grow and continue to be discipled and they have care at those institutions. And I get those choices, on that side. But I am biased to Christian universities. If you reach out to me, I'm going to be talking to the universities about the universities that I work with and the universities that I'm aware of, and I'm a champion for them, for all of them. And I definitely would want to end with that I'm a champion for Christian education and believe in that. And the cost is worth it, but don't be afraid to have discussions and being straight up with families, and don't let the FAFSA define you. Because as you're discussing, FAFSAs define you.
I didn't know I had an option of that.
And FAFSAs feel like they just define me, and you're like, wait, there's all these other things that are going on or maybe coming up, and you need to disclose all of that. Don't be afraid to do that. So
that is a beautiful thing. I think what goes into your mind is so important. And I can't help but think again, when you were saying that, I was thinking price and cost.
Yes.
And again, this is no shade or shame to anyone who's going to a state public school whatsoever. I think that you could certainly make a play and an argument for that.
Definitely.
I am a huge fan. We're on a podcast set right now. I'm a huge fan of podcasts.
Yes.
There's so many great ones out there. And I think what you put in your mind is so important. And why I am with you on having a personal preference to private Christian is we're in a battle today for the minds of young people and adults alike.
Definitely.
And there is a game being played there that is not explicitly expressed, and it's escalating.
That's right.
And so, I have some podcasts that I love listening to that really fill me up and help me expand my mindset and focus me back on the Lord, and even give like a Christian worldview lens to things that are happening in the world politically, economically, which I really appreciate.
Yes.
And so there can be supplemental things done if someone's going to a public university.
That's right.
And involvement with a local community of believers is such a powerful thing.
Exactly.
And so anyways, thank you so much for coming on the show today, man. This has been amazing. I know it's going to bless some people, and people can share this with their friends.
Definitely.
And, we're coming into that season.
Yes,
so,
we are.
This will be a great one to share every time, every year about this time,
Definitely.
or maybe sooner per some of the dates you mentioned
Definitely.
there. So, grateful for your time today. Thanks so much for coming on the Made to Be Great podcast, and we hope to see you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
You were made to be great.
Don't settle for less.
You were made to be great.
Don't settle for less.
You were made to be great.
Don't settle for less.
You were made to be